Hello. In this video, we're going to go over how to use state in React. We're going to go with a classic example of how to do so. We're going to create a button that, when clicked, will increment a number that it's displaying to the user. So first things first, in order to have a state variable inside of a React functional component, we need to use the useState hook. The useState hook comes from the React library, and so an import for it looks like this. It's a function, like all hooks, that when invoked, creates a new variable under the hood in React associated with this particular instance of this particular component. So in this case, my app component is being created inside of my main.jsx component right here. And this particular instance gets one state variable so far. If I were to create more instances of this app component, let's say if I just did that, now this has one of these state variables, and this has another one, a separate one just for itself. When you invoke this function, you get to pass in one parameter, one main parameter. This parameter is the default or initial value of this state variable. In our case, our counter that we're going to set up here will have an initial value of 0. We'll start the count off at 0. When you call the useState function, it will return to you an array with two things inside of it, a getter and a setter for that state variable. For our purposes, we're going to go ahead and destructure out that array, and it's a pattern that you'll commonly see. So const will pop open our square brackets to the left of the equal sign in order to indicate that we expect whatever's after the equal sign to be an array. And then we're going to say, in that array, I would like the getter and the setter, but we're going to give them better names. For our context, we'll call the getter count and the setter setCount. The getter is a variable that holds the current value of that variable. The setter is a function that allows you to pass in an updated value for that state variable. Whenever you update the value of a state variable, the instance of the component that it's inside will go over and ask if it needs to be re-rendered. By that, I mean, if I were to call setCount and set count to 1 as opposed to 0, my function of app would be called again by React, and React would go, let's say I was rendering count here. It was 0 a moment ago, and that's what I was rendering inside of this main tag, and now you set it to 1, so yes, I do need to re-render what's inside of this main tag's inner text. So let's go ahead and queue that up so we can see something on the page. I'm going to go ahead and create a button, just a simple button, and we'll say click me, and we'll throw the count in there like I just threw it inside of the main a second ago. I'll save that, and you can see we now have that static text of click me alongside the current count. If I were to change this initial value, just so you see what happens here, to let's say 10, we should expect that this will say click me and 10, because now that's the initial value of the state variable. We're going to head back to 0, and we're going to say, all right, Mr. Button, when you are clicked, I want to handle your click with a, well, let's call it something a bit more semantic, handle increment. And let's go create that function. Handle increment equals use callback, because it's a callback function that's being used inside of our rendering logic or inside of our logic layer. Here, whenever that button is clicked, I would like to set count. I would like to update it. Now, setCount is a function to which we can pass one parameter. That parameter can either be the new value directly. For example, if I just wanted to update it to 1, I can put the number 1 inside of there. It can be a calculation, i.e. a JavaScript expression, because that's exactly what this 1 is here. It's just a very simple JavaScript expression. Or it can be a callback function. I urge you to use the callback function form of this, which is what we'll be doing here in a second, whenever you're updating a state variable based off of its previous value, which is exactly what we're doing here. We're going to update this state variable, this count, based off of what it was before. Now you could do 1 plus count, but the bad portion to this, aside from adding a new dependency to this callback, is that you can run into what's called stale state. I'll show that to you in just a moment. Let's go ahead and go over how to do it the right way. So we're going to set count. I'll put a callback function inside of here. I like to call this prep previous. You can also call it prep count, for example. I'm just going to stick with prep for brevity. So this callback function takes the current value, the most up-to-date value of this state variable, guaranteed. Because it's being passed down into the state variable's logic itself, so the state variable gets the opportunity to say, yeah, this is my most up-to-date value. And we want to take that most up-to-date value, and in our case, add 1 to it. And that will be, so the return value of our callback is the new value of our state variable. So if I click this button now, I should expect this 0 to go to 1. If I were to click it again, I should expect it to go to 2, and so on and so forth. And that's how to create a state variable in React. The main part is this guy right here, calling that useState function, passing in the initial value, and most likely destructuring out the array that it returns to get the getter and the setter. Some pitfalls to avoid. Don't use the getter to update the state variable. Don't try to say count equals count plus 1. Invoking the setter is how React gets the opportunity to go, oh, this said click me 0 a second ago, and now count has changed to 1 because you've updated the state variable using the setter. So I should go through and call this function again to see if the return value has changed. Always use the setter. I know that gets annoying if you're used to vanilla JavaScript and you're used to just using your variable directly, but in this case, you have a layer that you're tapping into. You're tapping into React's workflow, and you want React to know, I updated the state variable, so it could do what it needs to do under the hood for you. So it's a positive trade-off in that case. Let's get to that other one that I touched on just a moment ago, that pitfall that I talked about. We're going to create 2 buttons in order to demonstrate this. We're going to make a handle increment and a handle increment jank. So this handle increment jank is going to still be a use callback. We're still going to use best practices here. And I'm going to set count to count plus 1. Now this is the thing that I said, don't do that earlier because you might wind up with stale state. And it's a bit easier to demonstrate first on this one, I think. So I have this, let's go ahead and say, for whatever reason, I have this set timeout. And the value of the button is actually only incremented 3 seconds after the button is clicked. You can think of this as analogous to an asynchronous operation that's taking place inside of this component. I'm just kind of jimmying it up to make it happen after we call set timeout. For good measure, I'll also put this guy inside of a set timeout. And we'll even give them the same amount of time. So bear with me, we're going to have to wait 3 seconds when I click these buttons in order to see what's happening. But let's click the good button first. If I click this and then click this, I should expect that I get 1 and then 2 when this guy goes through. I got 1 and then I got 1 again. Let's make that a little bit more obvious. So I click this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Wait for it. There it goes. So 5 times, we waited 3 seconds, and then went over and updated that based off of its previous value. Now what happens when I click this guy 5 times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It updates it to 7 5 times. Because when I clicked this button, the current value of the count was 6. So it said set count to that 6 plus 1 5 times. Whereas this guy said, go ahead and set count to whatever it currently is plus 1. So those are the pitfalls, and overall that's how to use state. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful. If you would like a one-on-one session going over how to use state in React or something else with React, go ahead and click the link in the description.